Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record statements of support for my bill, Risky Research Review Act, from the scientific community and various stakeholder groups. Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered. I will now turn over the gavel to Ranking Member Paul, who will share the end of the meeting and bring us to a close. So with that, Ranking Member Paul, you now have the gavel.
Thank you. Dr. Wolinetz, during your tenure of working for Francis Collins, he sent an email to Anthony Fauci, and in the email he said that he directed Anthony Fauci to orchestrate a takedown of Drs. Kulldorff and Bhattacharya. Were you aware of that email at the time?
I don't specifically recall it.
Okay. I want to remind the panel that you all continue to be under oath, and it is a crime to lie to Congress. Were you directed by Francis Collins to participate in a takedown, malignment, disparagement of either Drs. Kulldorff or Bhattacharya?
No.
Did you plant any articles or discuss with anyone in the media articles that disparaged Dr. Kulldorff or Bhattacharya or their positions?
No.
In Dr. Fauci's response to this email, he responds by saying, don't worry, this is a paraphrase, don't worry, Dr. Collins, I'm on it. I got a story planted in Wired and I think another lay publication, but he was actively doing Dr. Collins' bidding. So I am surprised that as the Chief of Staff, you had no awareness of that there was a policy of taking down these scientists. Dr. Parker, you've had long, distinguished careers. Have you ever directed any of your employees to take down fellow scientists who you disagreed with?
No.
Dr. Redfield, you've had a long and distinguished career. Have you ever directed any of your employees to take down scientists who you had a disagreement with?
No.
Dr. Esvelt, same question.
No.
Dr. Wolinetz, did you attend the gain-of-function dual-use research of concern meetings during your tenure in government?
Yes.
Were you considered to be a member?
A member of what specifically,
I don't know.
Senator?
Is there a group called that? Is it a meeting? Who gets to go? Were you?
So I participated in many groups inside government in which biosecurity, management of dual-use research.
This is a very specific meeting, though. This is the week, it's called in this email, Weekly Dual-Use Research of Concern Gain-of-Function Meeting. Did you attend those routinely?
I don't recall a meeting called that, although it's quite possible I was involved. That name doesn't ring a bell.
This would be a meeting to discuss things that might be gain-of-function. Did you attend those meetings?
No, not if they were meetings at the level of an individual NIH institute to review research. I was not at all involved in that process. This
is a email. It's from Teresa, I don't know how you pronounce it, Hogwell? How do you know how to say it? H-A-U-G-U-E-L, and it's to, let's see, Irene Glowinski, Dennis Dixon, Linda Lambert, David Spiro. You familiar with those names?
I believe those are all employees of NIAID.
Okay. So you think this meeting may have occurred within NIAID and you might not have participated in it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are you surprised that when I asked for the debate over what is and what is not, because there's a debate over what is the definition of gain of function, that the NIH still refuses to give me minutes of these meetings or any of the discussion concerning what is gain of function and what is not gain of function?
I can't speak to NIH's decision.
Do you think that's an appropriate policy for the NIH to refuse to give members of Congress the debate over whether something is or is not gain of function?
My general philosophy at NIH was to always be as cooperative with members of Congress as humanly possible.
Your boss, not so much. When he was for that when he wasn't busy taking down fellow scientific colleagues. Dr. Parker, do you think it's appropriate for the NIH to refuse to give Congress the minutes or deliberations over what is or what is not gain of function, particularly concerning research that was done in Wuhan?
Inappropriate.
Dr. Redfield, do you think the NIH should release, do you think it's inappropriate that they won't release, and should they release the information concerning the deliberations over gain of function?
Yeah, I think it's inappropriate that they don't share that information.
Dr. Esfeld, do you think it's inappropriate that the NIH continues to refuse to reveal information considering the deliberations over gain of function?
I think transparency is essential to public trust in science, and I think NIH has a duty to uphold public trust in science insofar as possible.
The public needs to realize that I only know of this meeting existing because of a Freedom of Information Act. The Senate, groups of senators, the ranking member of a committee, they will not reveal they even have the meeting, much less the minutes of the meeting. I can get more information from the CIA than the NIH. Dr. Redfield, do you think that damages science when the science are acting like the CIA and not revealing information? Does it damage our trust in science?
I think it's going to be very hard for public trust to be regained, at NIH, CDC, FDA, from what we experienced in the COVID pandemic.
Dr. Redfield, do you think, we talked a little bit about this before, but taking the backbone of a SARS virus and adding various S proteins from other unknown viruses to see what you get, running through that through serial passage, should that have gone before some sort of gain of function review, even if it, to figure out whether it meets a definition of dangerous research?
Yes.
One of Anthony Fauci's responses has been, well, they're two animal viruses and we don't know that they will infect humans. But by the time you combine them, the test they do is they actually test them to see if they infect human cells after they're done manipulating them. So their goal really is to see, hey guys, do you think we can make it more infectious? And yet they say, and they hide behind definitions of, well, we didn't know in advance. And this becomes the problem. And look, I come from a scientific background. I'm aware of CRISPR technology, not enough to do it, but aware of the great benefits of science. I'm aware of creating bacteria that make insulin. Not against any of those kind of things. But I do want scientists like yourselves to be on some sort of committee to overlook this. But I get the feeling that over and over again, this has been hidden and been in-house. There was actually, and I'm trying to remember if it's the same board that you led, Dr. Parker, but it's the NAA, remind me the acronym for your board?
NSABB.
And you're still ahead of it.
I'm still a member of the committee, but any of my comments today are not reflective. They're on
Okay.
my
And I won't put you on the spot on this, but there's a story from like 4, 8, 10 years ago of like a whole bunch of people being fired by Dr. Fauci because they disagreed with his opinion on gain of function. And so that it's just another indication that we can't have this all within house and it's like, oh, no big deal. There really has to be some independent people outside of government to look at that. And that's what I emphasize over and over is that we have to get to some sort of independent board here. Dr. Wolinetz, you were a member of the PC 3O committee, correct?
That's correct.
Who were the other members?
I don't recall all of them off the top of my head. There were about a dozen. I know there were representatives from ASPR, from the communications, Bill Hall at HHS. It's been a while.
Are you aware that they were also refusing to give us the names? I think the names have been published by the COVID committee, but they've been refusing to give the names of the people on the COVID committee. I mean, on the...
As a member of the committee, previous member of the committee, I have no objection to the names being released.
But you can see the problem. So you set up an oversight committee, but the oversight committee never saw the Wuhan research. Should the Wuhan research, taking a SARS backbone and putting a new S protein on it and running through human cells to see if it infects, and then it turns out it did, and then we say, oh, it's only 1,000 times more, and we'll give you more leeway to do it, et cetera, all the stuff that happened with EcoHealth. In retrospect, should that have gone before the P3CO committee?
So, Senator Paul, I think one of the things I've learned in engaging this, particularly as a non-virologist myself, although I'm a scientist, I don't know that much about virology, is that it's really important to have expertise to be able to evaluate that benefit and risk and talk about whether or not it meets the scopes of these policies. However, I do agree that, and I'm glad we're discussing whether or not there is an opportunity to do this better, to introduce independent earlier in the process.
That's a general answer, and that's fine. But very specifically, should the research putting a new S protein, a random S protein from a random unknown virus on a SARS backbone, creating an infectious chimera, and then deciding or looking to see if it infects human cells more, should that have gone before the P3CO committee, yes or no?
I do not know enough about the research to be able to make that. That was why I was not part of the process that referred
That's
it.
really disappointing, and I mean, would exclude me from considering you for any board, frankly, if you can't admit, I mean, because you're still in your mind thinking, oh, I don't want to criticize Francis Collins, or I don't want to criticize Anthony Fauci, because this is your group, you know. But in retrospect, 15 million people died. The Department of Energy have concluded it came from the lab. So is the FBI. So did the CIA, until higher-ups at the CIA told them to change their opinion. But the group of scientists at the CIA, according to a whistleblower, voted 6-1. Look at what we're faced with. And people wonder about vaccine hesitancy or hesitancy of science. If you look at the information, for example, one of the strongest circumstantial evidence that they may have done this in the lab and that the furin cleavage site may have been added is the fact that in 2018, Dr. Shi and Dr. Barrick presented something called the diffuse proposal. Are you aware of the diffuse proposal?
I've read about it in the news, but I was not aware about it contemporaneously.
Contemporaneously, you weren't aware of it?
No, I'd never heard of it.
And here's the thing. Do you know how I'm aware of it? The NIH didn't tell me. The HHS didn't tell me. No one in government told me. A colonel in the Marines who worked for DARPA told me, under the protection of the whistleblower statute. In our government, we're concerned the Chinese lied to us and that they are distrustful, which is probably true. But in our government, you know, you may not have liked the tone of the other senators, but this is what we're faced with. The diffuse proposal was never told to us. In the diffuse proposal, it was a proposal to take a coronavirus, put a furin cleavage site in it, and test it to see if it was more infectious in humans. What did COVID-19 turn out to be? A very unusual, if not the first virus in a family of viruses to have a furin cleavage site. It's why alarm bells went off in all of Anthony Fauci's cronies that were all saying it came from the lab, it looks like it was engineered, until they were convinced somehow within days to write the proximal origin paper saying it wasn't, and calling everybody crazy and a conspiracy theorist, and calling Facebook and everybody else and saying, Takedown, don't give any credence to these people. So you see what has happened to science. Francis Collins, your boss, at one point says, it's about, you know, damage to science. If anybody mentions that this might have come from a lab, it will damage science. Other people were saying it will damage our relations with China. So the truth wasn't so important. It was the business of science, the billions of dollars changing hand. And you and your boss, I mean, this whole cabal has created such damage to science in this, and it continues to this day. They will not give me the deliberations. We're not talking about secrets. We're not talking about informants. We're not talking about spies. I'm talking about scientists in my own government. Will not give me the deliberations on whether or not the research in Wuhan was. You still to this day won't admit it, even though the Department of Energy, FBI, and maybe as much as half of the scientific community are convinced it came from the lab. Even some might say it's 5% chance it came from the lab, and yet you won't admit that it's dangerous research. To this day, you will still sit there and say you're unable to judge whether the research going on in Wuhan was dangerous.
Senator Paul, I will say that the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic is unknown. When I was in the government, I had a high level of clearance and received the intelligence briefings to which you are referring. And my general conclusion is that there was a lack of consensus among analysts across the federal government. It was not as cut and dried as you are making it sound. I cannot speak to the innermost thoughts of anyone at NIH, but I will say in my personal experience, I never knew any of the scientists at NIH to be anything but open-minded because they thought that the information was power in being able to develop the diagnostics, treatments, and countermeasures, as well as future policies to help both address the COVID-19 pandemic and respond to future pandemics.
Dr. Wolinetz, have you visited the Rocky Mountain Lab?
No, I've never been there.
Were you aware of that the proposal to do the diffuse project involved laboratory work that was to be done at the Rocky Mountain Lab?
No, as I said, I was not aware of the diffuse proposal.
Okay. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Dr. Wolinetz,